Ever find that channel?
No, it just disappeared. Poof. It's weird. And it's weird because I had another channel that it was long defunct that popped up again. It's
Oh,
just,
really? Wow.
yeah, technology, man.
Yeah, no kidding.
All right. Hello, YouTubers. We're getting a late start today, but better late than never, as they say. And get this tweeted out here for the for other folks. That's done. And get in here and start the regular podcast. Hello and welcome to the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast here on hawkfanatic.com. It is Thursday, October the 31st. Ooh, spooky.
Ooh.
9:21 a.m. We don't have Halloween candy yet, Scott. Is Scott
No.
Doctorin from The Athletic joining me? No, we're gonna have to make that last dash. So kids, you could end up with Smarties and like sugar daddies tonight if that's all that's left on the shelf.
Any extra? Do you have any extra of those little Iowa notebooks? Like these.
Yeah, I get
Just start
those.
throwing them out there.
Pens. I got a lot of pens from
There.
hotels throughout my life.
You know what? I'd rather give them my notebooks for whatever reason. I mean, I have probably 1,000 pens here, but I still make sure I lose them on a daily basis. And I drive my wife crazy because I'll be, on the couch watching TV, but I always have to have a notebook and pens by me just because I'll think of something and I'll write it down, or I'll, all right, well, let's do my own little college football playoff, because it kind of gets me in a frame of mind if I'm thinking about it. And Lord knows I'll have 3 or 4 pens sitting now. It's like, will you put those away? And I'm like, okay, fine. So I have like this little footstool that, you remove the top, and I've shoved so much stuff in there now. And it's, all these loose pens. It's funny.
Pens are what we used to use to write for you kids that just do everything electronically now. And paper is what we wrote on with the pen to write notes. And I do the same thing. I've got a notebook and pen down in our family room right by the TV, because if I'm watching an Iowa game or any other game and something pops into my head, like Scott, you like to write it down, because the other another aspect of getting old is you forget shit all the time. So you have to write it down.
We killed enough brain cells in our past that now we've got to try to preserve what we got, and to make up for it, we write it down, because it's otherwise we're dead in the water.
We are going to mostly focus on the Hawkeyes here, but we kind of gotten into a pattern this fall with Scott being a national writer for The Athletic to kind of take a broad view of the sport for football, college football, that is, and then kind of zoom into Iowa as we get there. As we know, Tuesday is a huge day in our country. College football playoffs are released on Tuesday night. There may or may not be something else going on that day, but obviously on this podcast, our focus is the college football playoff. 7 of these, Scott, or 6? You remember?
Weeks.
The playoff, 6 or 7 Tuesdays. I wrote it down in a story recently, whatever it is, but we know the first one previously, and you wrote about this for your college football playoff feature this week, about years where it would have benefited to have an expanded playoff. But I'll be interested to see this year how much movement there is from week 1 release to the final release on Sunday, the last Sunday before we get to the postseason.
Yeah, a lot of that's going to be based on some of the games among the teams. I mean, like this week is a huge one in the Big Ten, as we know, with Ohio State, Penn State. Then there's like Tennessee plays Georgia in a couple of weeks. Georgia's got a couple of really tough ones, Ole Miss, Tennessee. SMU and Pittsburgh is really big because they're both undefeated in the ACC. And so there are just all those kinds of games that come up, and that's kind of what's going to shuffle it a little bit. Indiana's playing Ohio State in a couple of weeks. That's going to be a big one. But in the Big Ten, really there are 4 teams that are alive, and I think looking at this, at the big picture, Rob, that even if Iowa would have went to East Lansing and won, right now, I don't know that they'd be in it. I don't think they'd be really close. I mean, there's some years, and I look back through them, and where there was just absolute chaos. I mean, like in 2007, for instance, when LSU beat Ohio State in the BCS championship, they were a 2-loss team. And then there are other years, and one of them that I really examined was 1973, where you had six
Iowa was not in the picture that year.
No, they were on the other side. They were like 11-1 or something that
Yeah,
year.
not a good season in Iowa City.
No, not at all. But
if you're feeling bad about this year, go back and look at some of the seasons in the 1970s for Iowa football.
Yeah, and that was Frank Lordeber, where they were like they lost every game. I think they were 0-11 because I think Mark Jennings telling me he was like team manager that year. So it was just that's kind of funny. But yeah, here's the rundown in like 1973, just to throw it out there for shits and giggles. And Alabama going into the Bowls. And things changed after the Bowls because they finally voted afterwards. But Alabama was undefeated. Oklahoma was 10-0-1, but was on probation and couldn't go to a bowl game. Notre Dame was 10-0. Ohio State and Michigan had their infamous tie, the tiebreaker in 73. So they were both 10-0-1. And only Ohio State could go to a bowl game after they got voted in by the Big Ten's athletic directors in a very nefarious situation.
Couldn't imagine what that would be like on social media these days. My Lord, they would blow it up.
Yeah. And Penn State was an independent and they were undefeated too. So you had 6 major blue blood programs all undefeated. And then right after that, you had USC at 7, Texas at 8. So you think about, can you imagine that era, back and then, Michigan and Oklahoma didn't even go to a bowl game, let alone and then we had the tie-ins in one year, and I'll veer off on this. I apologize, but it's just kind of interesting to me. And that is,
I would encourage people to read the article on The Athletic too. Sorry, go ahead.
1960, Iowa was clearly the best team in the country. There's really no doubt about it. And if you look back at it, you go, they should have been the national champ. Out of their 9 games, their first 8 were against teams in the top 20. Wow. And the only one they lost was Minnesota. And Minnesota only played 2 teams in the top 20. And when they met up in Minneapolis, Iowa had just a shit ton of errors. They had a punt that went over the punter's head, or the snap went over the punter's head. A couple of turnovers, and they lose. It looked like it was decisive, but it was actually closer than what it was, 27-10. And then Minnesota goes and loses the next week to Purdue. And Iowa, the movement in the poll was just insane. Iowa drops to 5, then they rise to 2 because their next week was against number 3 Ohio State and Woody Hayes, and they won 35-12. And then their last game, for almost 20 years they played Notre Dame last in the season, and they won 28-0. I mean, they blitzed the entire year. They had one bad game, and they just kept. They went up to 2. They had high first place votes. Then they're like, it's kind of like with Michigan in 06 after they lost to Ohio State. Mm-hmm. But Iowa, because it lost to Minnesota won the tiebreaker, went to the Rose Bowl. Iowa didn't go anywhere. And, had that year even had a bowl opportunity because the Big Ten didn't rescind that until 75. They would have probably went to the Sugar Bowl, played Ole Miss, and would have won the national title outright, no question, but didn't have it. So that was kind of an argument year that really favored Iowa when I looked at it. And I wanted to go with one of them, and that one was the clear one. I mean, because they're every statistical category, they were just absolute monster of a team. And again, losing
Randy Duncan's senior year was 60,
that was 2 years. That was 2 years before
50.
that. He's 58.
Okay. 58 was his senior year. Okay. Yeah. Who was the quarterback in 60? Was that
Wilburn Hollis?
Wilburn Hollis. That's right. Yeah.
And, I wrote about this about 5 years ago before the Floyd of Rosedale game that year. And that is the first major college football game, Iowa, Minnesota, where you had 2 black starting quarterbacks. Iowa was number 1. Minnesota was 2 in one poll, in the coaches poll, and 3 in the AP poll. And they had Sandy Stevens, who was a great quarterback. And, so it's really a historical game and a historical moment and pivotal to that season. And then there were other, teams that, like Iowa went out of conference, played, highly ranked Kansas, which finished 11th and beat it by 2 touchdowns. And just, it was just a really fun year for the Hawkeyes.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting this year, all those debates through the years. And as much as they have tried to fix it from, the BCS to the college football playoff, all the iterations of trying to figure out who the best team is. You would hope that the 12-team playoff gives them an opportunity to do so. But when this thing comes down, 13 and 14 are going to be crying from the rooftops come the last Sunday of the regular or after the conference championship games. People are going to complain, and that's the way it goes. But complaining at 13 and 14 is a lot different than complaining at like 3 or 4 or then when it goes to 4 teams, 5 and 6. So I think it's in good shape. It looks like the interesting thing for me will be, we talked about earlier in the season how many SEC teams, how many Big Ten teams. I think the ACC has kind of improved its stock a little bit. It'll be interesting to see if a team like Georgia, as you mentioned, with a hard schedule, has 3 losses. What do you do with that? And so it'll be interesting to see what the committee does because that's going to cause friction if you take like a 3-loss Georgia team over a 1-loss ACC team. But SEC and the Big Ten they're the kings right now. So everybody else kind of has to deal.
Yeah, I mean, you got 7 at-large spots, and like the Big Ten is pretty cut and dried right now. You got 4 teams for 3.5 spots. I mean, I think 3 are going to be in unless there's just some sort of a massive, like Indiana loses 2 or 3 games or something. I don't see that happening. But the question is going to come down to like the last at large. I mean, where does Notre Dame fit in? I mean, if Notre Dame's 11-1, let's just say that the Big 12 championship games between BYU and Iowa State, and both of them are undefeated, and one of them is going to lose. Then it's like, well, what if you have an 11-1 Indiana, an 11-1 Notre Dame, and a 12-1 Iowa State, or you have in the SEC, teams again that pass the eye test, and their schedule is challenging, no question. I mean, everybody's got a loss in that league, and so it's I've heard some Iowa State fans already are bracing to get screwed, and I'm kind of like, well,
let's play the season out first.
I said it yesterday on the radio, Rob. I was like, just enjoy this when it lasts, man. This doesn't happen all that often. They've never been 8-0 before. That they could be 8-0 this week. Enjoy it. Worry about the problems later on, and then as you said, Miami's undefeated. Clemson's got 1 loss to Georgia, so whatever, one of them loses, so there's a lot of chaos that's on its way. But I agree with you. I'd rather see chaos for who's team 13 and 14 than teams 5. Like last year with Florida State being undefeated and getting left out. That was hard. That was like, geez, that sucks.
It seems to have impacted Seminoles this season. They've had a hangover from not making the college football.
Yeah.
Good Lord.
It's like that Orange Bowl beatdown 63-3 by Georgia when everybody opted out. That just kind of, let's just keep going here.
You mentioned the Big Ten teams that are in 4 right now that kind of are jockeying and trying to get, finish out the season and get into the college football playoff. We'll keep an eye on that moving forward. Looking back to last week, the Iowa game, 40-14 against Northwestern. And it's always fun, Scott, to go through your mental kind of Rolodex and think about the things we've talked about, preseason, what we expect. It's like, okay, this wasn't something that we saw coming, and you couldn't see it coming. Starting quarterback gets injured, backup comes in, starting quarterback has a concussion. Storylines make a season, right? So this could be a storyline that I think could be very impactful for this season, because it is, as we talked about last week with Brendan Sullivan, somewhat of a preview of next season if you consider him QB1, and he now has a chance to audition for that right now. And this hasn't happened the way people expected it to, but we can talk about it more. I don't think there's an argument against that Brendan Sullivan is a better fit for Tim Lester's offense than Cade McNamara. And in fairness to Cade McNamara, he was brought in for another offensive system.
You're right. And I I like this for a couple of reasons. First, let me predate that. Preface it by saying I don't like what happened to Cade McNamara.
Oh,
Getting a concussion, that's terrible. Wish him the best. Hope he comes back healthy, and that's most important. He's 24 years old, and
and the way Brendan Sullivan runs, they very well may need him.
Yeah, for sure. It could be.
He's one pop away, one shot away from them needing to put in another quarterback.
Yeah, and as we know from last year, if nothing else, Cade's not Deacon Hill.
No.
So I think that's an improvement there. But but having Brendan Sullivan, it makes sense in multiple reasons. One, as you said, I think it's a better fit for Tim Lester, what he wants to do and how he wants to move the ball, more RPOs. I think that he can really kind of break out his his playbook and kind of go with that with Brendan Sullivan in there, because he can run the ball and he's quicker, so there can be more, the team can look and struggle with the mesh point, where's the ball going to go? Is it going to go to Caleb Johnson, or is he going to keep it? And whereas before it was just kind of
you just key on Caleb, because Cade's not going to pull it and run with it. He may pull it and throw it, but he's not running with it. So that's two elements. With Sullivan, it's three elements. Is he going to hand it off to Cade? Is he going to run, or is he going to throw it? The motion doesn't work as well when the quarterback isn't a threat to run. That's what we're talking about in terms of Sullivan being a better fit. Now we'll see what happens if a team makes him throw.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think also, as far as a quarterback goes, he's a fairly accurate quarterback, I would say. His completion percentage is high. And I think that is something that we should, that if he can make the makeables in the passing game, which a lot of times will be zone read, pullback, throw over the middle, where he's been fairly effective, then I think this is a much better fit for what Iowa wants to do for the rest of this year. And I think big picture, Rob, and this may be more important, as the season kind of hits its, back half, and that is, what are you going to do next year at this position? Cade is gone. Brennan has one more year of eligibility. Do you need to go to the portal? Or is Brendan Sullivan going to go out there and go, wow, he's a lot better than I thought he was, and we really want him to be our starter next year. And we're going to avoid the portal. We'll just give him a little bit more money and to try to develop a younger quarterback or something. Or if you do go in the portal, it's one of those redshirt freshman types that has a lot of talent but got trapped at something like that. So I like the way this played out, without liking the reason why it played out the way it did.
If you looked at it, though, the plan was to give Brendan Sullivan full series last week, because if you notice, when Iowa on its first drive got to the red zone, there was no Brendan Sullivan. Cade stayed in there, and I'm like, well, that's interesting. And then, as Kirk said after the game, the plan was third or fourth series to let Brendan have his own series. And ironically, the fourth series is when he came in, because the third series was when Cade got hurt. He got a late hit, which was bad. I had a pretty good angle on that. And then I took a still photo. I was focused on him on the pick six too, and he took a shot in the back. So that kind of, but I don't know what the plan would have been, if the plan would have been altered, so to speak, with the way Cade had been playing, had he not been hurt. Was it still going to be a rotation? We'll never know.
Yeah. Right. And there's the skeptical side when you start dealing with Kirk Ferentz and quarterbacks, that if Cade would have been fine, he threw the pick six. Well, we were going to put in Brendan anyway, and he plays it out to the end of the half. And then third quarter, Cade comes out and starts the third quarter. That's almost what you expect with Kirk now. That would have been insane. I'll be honest with you.
I think it may have been the plan.
Yeah.
I think the plan was to rotate them, give them each throughout the game.
What I mean,
I don't know how it break that. No, I'm following you. I'm with you saying that I don't like how this evolved and how we got to this point, because I don't think we would have gotten to this point with if Cade hadn't got hurt yet, at
Right.
least.
Exactly. What would have happened if hey, it was just part of the plan. Brennan goes in. Because he had, what, three and outs before
Yeah, he
the.
didn't. Would have given Kirk the, hey, we put him in. He's 2, 3 and outs. Let's
Yeah,
put Cade back in.
yeah, exactly. And then, but he got a scoring drive before half.
Yep.
Caleb Johnson had another one of his signature runs, and guys, enjoy this. You get 2 more home opportunities to watch him play.
Yep.
He hasn't declared, but Lord knows he's declaring. He's got a chance to work another first round the way he's going. But anyway,
He'll be fun at the combine.
Yeah. You mean that facetiously, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, standing up, these kind of, I guess I'll find out, right?
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. So with the quarterback situation, from here, I don't think it's a given that Sullivan's the guy for the rest of the season, because he has a shorter lease than Cade did. You would agree with that?
yeah, absolutely. I think if I was to make a guess, and this is just an educated guess, or if you think I'm full of it, an uneducated guess, is that obviously this is his week. I think he probably starts against UCLA if he's healthy and everything. That they, because it's a short week of prep and everything, and whether Cade's healthy enough to go, it's like, we'll just ride it with him, unless he has just a horrific game against Wisconsin. And then once they get back from UCLA, then they have a little bit more time, one extra day to kind of evaluate it and see where they want to go. And that's what I can expect. I could exceed that. Okay. Because they got a bye week too, in the middle there between going to Maryland and then playing at Nebraska at home. So I could see that between the UCLA and Maryland trips that now we'll just kind of play it out and stuff.
Yeah, for me, if it's even,
no, yeah,
play Sullivan. I mean, I know you're still playing to win as many games as you can, but I think the larger sample size you can get, the biggest sample size you can get of Sullivan playing, and then you have evidence of whether or not he's going to be your guy next year. I think you need to do that. You want to be fair to Cade. If he's beating Sullivan out, if it's clear that he's better, put him in there. But if it's even or Sullivan's ahead, I think you play Sullivan.
I'm 100% agree with you on this, because you've got to know what you've got, because the free agent market's going to hit really hard right after the championship games. And you've got to know, okay, do I have faith that this guy next year can go out and be the starter and be good as the starter? Or do we need to bring somebody in, A, as competition, or B, to be our guy? I think that's really the thought process, what it has to be. And you don't know that right now based on how Brendan Sullivan has played. And I'm not going to even say that, he should be the starter next year. In a perfect world, if he's good enough, then maybe you evaluate your roster at that point and say, okay, if Brendan Sullivan's going to be your starter, but maybe he's not 100% there, but I think he's better than most of the people in the portal, and the other ones are going to cost too much, then go out and try to find a guy like Illinois did with Luke Altmaier. A younger guy, 1 or 2 years into a team, he's just trapped on the depth chart. Somebody's a 3-year starter ahead of him. He's a 4-star talent, just kind of, let's see what you got there, and maybe he could be the number 2. And then, in certain situations, you play him next year and as a sophomore, and then he becomes maybe it's a 3rd teamer at Ohio State. It's like, out of the Ohio State quarterbacks, and I'll just say this generally, there's Logan Clem, I can't remember his last name. He's the 3rd teamer or whatever from South Dakota. It starts with a K. And then there's Devin Brown, who's the number 2. Devin Brown is a starter for 80% of the teams in the sport. Logan, I don't know. But if So you got to decide, okay, is Brennan good enough to start next year? And you bring in Logan to be his backup and then maybe work him into being a starter? Or now we need a Devin Brown. That's just really kind of the way Iowa has to approach this. And the only way you can do that is to see what you got with Brendan Sullivan when the bullets are flying.
Yep. And I would think at this point, they have a pretty good read on Marco. They've had him in the program now enough to know whether they see a path to him being the guy. And then you've got Stratton, who would be third team this week. And then, as we talked about last week or the week before, James Reeser has moved to wide receiver. So that's one less quarterback. And then you've got Jimmy Sullivan coming in the 2025 class. That's not a deep quarterback room. I think, like you said, they have to go to the portal for something. And watching Sullivan play the rest of the season lets you know what that something is, whether it's a guy, the guy, a guy to compete with him, even, or a guy that you maybe want to develop because you've missed on the high school kids that you're trying to develop. Because you have to develop quarterback. You could go in the portal every year, but that's a tough way to live. To get a new starter every year, that's really a hard way to live.
It's a lot like you want to compare it to the NFL, Rob. I mean, it's the difference between drafting and developing, and then you have a bond with that player. And then when that, in the NFL, once they reach their, if it's a first rounder, you got 5 years, and then you got to pay up or whatever. But versus going to the free agent market and going and getting a Russell Wilson, like the Steelers did because they couldn't develop Kenny Pickett. And that's kind of the Steelers and the Hawkeyes are so much alike. And it's not
that's
just
an interesting situation too, because they've got Russell Wilson, who I watched the game the other night with Justin Fields sitting right next to him on the bench, learning from him. It's almost the same situation we're talking about.
Exactly. And so that's what they've got to figure out. And plus Ryan Fitzgerald's coming in next year. And with the scholarship situation, he's not necessarily a walk-on anymore. He's a good player. He's one that, we've seen it from time after time that sometimes Iowa ignores the right in front of your face, a Cam Miller, just up the road in Solon. Do you think Kevin Miller would have liked to have driven to Kinnick instead of Fargo? But he's better than everybody else they've recruited since Nate Stanley.
Again, that goes back to the identification part of this equation. It's the identification on the front end, then it's the development when they get here, and they haven't had success at either one recently.
Not even they may be as bad as any team in the country at that. And that's there's a lot of positives we can talk about with Kirk's legacy. That's not one. And that's and that goes to the nepotism situation. When you move your son up and then your son's the quarterback's coach, and then you have this, it's like, now you look at
it doesn't only affect when he was the quarterback's coach, it's affecting now, even when he's gone, and probably a couple years after he's gone, because you've wasted those years.
Right. I mean, look at all those guys. You hate to bring them up in a negative light, especially if they've left. But Peyton Manziel, I think, was the last of the Greg Davis era. But you had him. Spencer was quality. Spencer was the best one by far.
I think that was more of an issue of development.
Yeah.
Than it was identification. Because I think he was a good quarterback. I think they had something to work with there. He just didn't develop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he didn't. You could see, there were things that, his accuracy and stuff. He worked his ass off for that. And I'm thrilled that he's doing so much better at Utah State. I'd really like to actually spend time and watch one of his games just to kind of, just to gauge it myself. We know about his feet. He knows about his feet, but he's always had a big arm and he's a brilliant football mind. And I think in his case, was it the fact that his first year he had really good receivers. His second year they were okay, and then 3 and 4 they were dreadful. It's just and then you also got to look at, wow, I'm watching a game with Charlie Jones returning a kickoff for a touchdown, and Tyrone Tracy's running for touchdowns. And Amir Smith-Marset is still in the NFL, and Brandon Smith's on a practice team, and Sam Laporta is catching a touchdown in a game. And this is all within a couple of weeks of one another. And I'm like, yeah, what happened there? Tyler Goodson scores a touchdown for Indianapolis. Okay, what happened here? Why did this not work out? Now, offensive line, but there's some real issues when you look back and you see that the talent was kind of confirmed, and the schematics and the coaching may have not been.
Yep. And we'll see if this is the beginning of the process with Brendan Sullivan to cure, fix, get this position healthy, because this program is not going to reach its potential if the quarterback position continues to struggle the way it did. Because you saw last year they got away with it. This year, not so much. Didn't get it. They've got 3 losses, and the quarterback play hasn't been good. If the quarterback play is good, maybe we're talking about Iowa in the college football playoff discussion right now.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the Iowa State game; they're up 13-0. They very easily could have been a different score. They blew opportunities in the first half, and from the second quarter on, he was 5 of 18 passing. Cade was, and then at Michigan State in the first half, 3 of 9 passing. They loaded up the box. That was their whole goal, because they figured stop Caleb Johnson and we'll let the passing game beat us. And second half was better, but first half is where they lost that game. I mean, they're down 15-0 on the road because the quarterback couldn't hit simple passes. I mean, if they hit 3 of those, if there's 6 of 9 instead of 3 of 9, it changes the way the defense plays you, which enables Caleb Johnson to get to run the ball. But if he's going to underthrow guys and overthrow guys, and it's like, well, and be, part of it is his fundamentals just aren't good, and he doesn't have a great arm. So,
and it would have taken a really good effort and a clean game against Ohio State, but that third quarter gave him no chance. And that, again, having trouble behind center. Some of that was offensive line, but you got to secure the football too in those situations, and he did not. And don't want to dump on Cade. I don't think it's an effort thing. The guy's worked his ass off to get back from 2 major leg injuries, and I do think it's affecting the way he throws. Mm-hmm. I think his mechanics kind of broke down with the injuries when him trying to get back, and he just hasn't been able to get it back. And I mean, you don't know, maybe it clicks in, at some point this season, but at this point, you can't keep waiting.
Mm-hmm. In some ways, and this is a shame for him, in some ways it reminds me, going way back for me, when I covered Trent Green when he got traded from the Rams to the Chiefs in 1999 was when he had his knee shredded, and then that led to Kurt Warner and one of the great stories of all time. Yeah. He was a backup, kind of working his way back in 2000. Then in 2020 or 2001, he got traded to the Chiefs, and he was still pretty rusty, and you could tell that he wasn't stepping and throwing, because when you have an ACL, you're in his case, because he got crushed by Rodney Harrison in his knee, you could just see he was apprehensive. But then the next year is when he took off. But in Cade's case, this is it. So it's kind of a shame that it doesn't have that chance, but that's college football. It's a
and we
different
kind of knew this was possible, right? We talked about. I mean, it's not like he had the spring to get, knock off the rust. He literally, it was almost all the way into the summer before he was 100%, could go 100% again. And that's, so really during the season, he was going through what maybe he would have gone through in the spring and worked out.
Yeah, I know. That's, he got back, in June? He was able to do full workouts, but, new offense, didn't get a chance to really work with the line. Last year he, had the torn quad, and it's just, you add up some, and then the pre-existing injuries before that. So it's just, there's a lot of baggage, but, as we saw, like with Jack Tuttle this week at Michigan, he got another concussion. He just said, that's it. And he's kind of in the same boat. He's been playing for 15,000 years and, a couple of schools, and just decided to shut it down. And you wonder, is this going to be it for Cade after this? I mean, I suppose he could try to apply for a waiver and maybe get it, but I don't think Iowa's the healthiest spot for him or for Iowa for that matter.
Yeah, no doubt. And it's hard to know kind of what's going through his mind right now too, with everything he's been through in his career. But every all the evidence we have in watching him and listening to him and listening to his teammates is that he is a good teammate. And I think no matter what happens here, it seems like he and Brendan Sullivan have a good relationship. And I don't see disruption in the locker room. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's what you hope for, because
Yeah.
because otherwise it's incredibly selfish. If you're asking everybody to, if you're the lead, a leader, you're a team captain, and yet, whether it's performance based or what have you, you're not there supporting your team the way they've supported you. That would be, that would look really poorly on you. And who knows what his next, career is going to be, and maybe he's a coach, maybe something else, but I think that's,
I don't know what he's studied. Do you know what his,
no idea.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
Yeah.
He seems like a guy that would stay involved in the game though, at some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, that's kind of what I think. He's wired football a lot. Spencer's one that I've always known. I'm like, I remember from day one, I think it was Ken O'Keefe who said, he'd show up at your house at like 5 o'clock in the afternoon and knock on the door so he can watch film with you on a Sunday, in the middle of summer, so, that surprised me.
All right. We should probably talk about some Wisconsin, but we'll do that after we take a little bit of a break here. Support for the podcast comes from Systems Unlimited, celebrating 50 years of providing services to people living with disabilities and mental health needs throughout East Central Iowa. A list of their services and upcoming events can be found at sui.org. That is sui.org. Thank you to Systems Unlimited for the great work it's doing in our community for over half a century. We appreciate them sponsoring the podcast. We'll hear from a few more of our sponsors now, and Scott and I will be back on the other side to talk Badgers. Hang in there. Welcome back to the Hotspot podcast. Folks, switching is easy. We do it all the time. We switch on the lights. We switch TV channels. Some of us switch partners while square dancing. Well, that's a stretch. But what's not a stretch is how you can switch and save with State Farm. In fact, State Farm agent Chad Birch right here in Iowa City can switch you over so you can start saving today. Chad and his team are ready to welcome you to the State Farm neighborhood. With Chad Birch, it's easy to switch and save. Just give him a call. When you want the real deal, like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Hardcore Hawk fans got to have a Kinnick Scoreboard Entertainment Center. Contact Fanatics Furniture at 319-750-0005 or KNICK 3615 @gmail.com. Scoreboard Entertainment Centers. Be hardcore. 319-750-0005 or KNICK 3615 @gmail.com. Black Angel Restaurant. This would be a great day to go to Black Angel Restaurant, Scott. Downtown Iowa City. Wonderful food there. Scott and his family have been there. You could go tonight, go get dinner, go trick-or-treating, and then go visit the Black Angel in the cemetery. Woo! The Black Angel. Go check them out. Good stuff. All right, Scott. It is weird. We knew there would be kind of, I don't know, a different feel to the season than some of the traditions, or I guess 10 years and isn't maybe a tradition, but 10 years of the Big Ten West And the two teams competing in Kinnick Stadium this Saturday night won 7 of those 10 Big Ten West titles. And this was the game that oftentimes decided, or had it always usually had some type of an impact on who would win the division, because these were two of the best teams year in and year out in that division. But it is no more. And we move on and pour one out for the Big Ten West. But it's still, as Scott talked about earlier, it is an important game. There's a 72-pound bull that is meaningful to the players and the coaches on these teams. It's a rivalry game, and it's a chance for bowl positioning. And as Sebastian Castro said on Tuesday, Wisconsin's probably pissed off. Mm-hmm. It lost the last 2 games to Iowa, and they have to, and the Hawkeyes have to be ready for that. So there may not be a division or a championship on the line here, but there's plenty on the line.
Yeah, that's really the factor that everybody's got to remember. And I wrote about this earlier this week, Rob, where what do teams do when all their goals are gone? And Iowa hasn't been in this position for a long, long time because maybe their national title games aspirations had evaporated, in certain stages of those seasons, but not necessarily their, West Division titles. I mean, the last 3 years, it came down to the final game, or last year, they actually won it in the second to last game. 2 years ago against Nebraska, they had a chance to go to the championship game. And even in other years, like it was screwy during the COVID year, but there was still an outside chance. And in 19, they lost to Wisconsin because of that thunderous collision at the goal line, one of the loudest collisions I've ever heard in my life. And yet now we're sitting here on Halloween and what's the goal? What are you shooting for? And sometimes teams with stacked veterans who all come back for that one goal fall apart. But talking to Jay Higgins, and I wrote about it, and he's just really profound in how he views it. He's like, none of us are guaranteed the next level to play football. These are literally going to be the last games that I ever play in black and gold. And I want to play in black and gold, and I want to play for each other, And so there's just this bond that when we're not in it, that it's easy to overlook. And Wisconsin, I'm sure, feels the same way. And what do they have to play for? They have the same situation. They lost a non-conference game. They've lost 2 in the league. They're not going to the championship game. They're not going to the playoff. But yet they've got a rivalry in front of them, and when you face off against the Running Red W or the Tiger Hawk, that gets you jacked up. It's like, we don't want to lose to these guys. We want to win. And we want, and there is a symbol of victory attached to it. And it's a rivalry game. And of course, the coaches are still coaching for their jobs. And whether it's bowls positioning or just peel it all the way back just to beat a rival, I think that matters. And so I think we're going to see a very competitive, physical, emotional game on Saturday night. And just because they're not going to be in playoff positioning doesn't mean that it's going to matter any less to the players on the field.
No, not at all. And I think this is an important game for Luke Fickell and his staff too. They're trying to figure it out. They changed a lot when they went to Wisconsin. They changed the schematically what they were and what they had success with for a lot of years. And he's still in the prove it stage. Prove that the changes you made were for the better for this program. And I think the jury's still out on that. And if you look at Wisconsin's schedule left, Scott, they still have a game with number 1 Oregon. They play at Nebraska, and then they play for the Axe after this. That's a tough run. They need to win this game if they want to maybe take a step forward as a program this season from what it was in year 1 with Fickell and staff.
Exactly. I mean, if we want to analyze the schedules, theirs is much more difficult than Iowa's.
Yeah.
And their final 5 were much more difficult than what, of a stretch is just about anybody. Maybe Michigan's is close, but, playing Penn State at home, then going to Iowa, then having a week off, but then you got to play the number 1 team in the country right now in Oregon, going to Nebraska. And I think Nebraska is improving, and they've, they've got their own little rivalry trophy too, the Liberty
And,
Trophy or Freedom
and,
Trophy.
and those two coaching staffs are in a similar
Yeah,
position. Matt Rule and Luke Fickell are both trying to get their teams up into that top part of the Big Ten.
exactly. And then they finish with a team that's playing really well right now in Minnesota, and that's their biggest rival. You want to keep the Axe if you can, or get the Axe one way or the other. I mean, that's
Did they play for a trophy against Nebraska?
Yes, it's officially called the Freedom Trophy, and we make fun of sometimes the Heroes Trophy, although I don't make fun of the reasoning behind it. I think it's terrific what they do, but the trophy itself is like, but the Freedom Trophy is even worse. I mean, that's just like, oh, let's pick one word. Flip a coin, liberty or freedom? Oh, freedom won, so we're going to be the Freedom Trophy.
Freedom fries.
Yeah, exactly.
French fries on the trophy.
Yeah.
So they have 3 trophy games, regardless if this one is ridiculous, and Oregon left, Wisconsin.
Right. Exactly.
That's rough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and there's not one that I'm looking at that and saying, oh, they'll win that game. Like I look at Iowa thinking, if you play poorly at UCLA, maybe you lose. If you play really poorly, maybe at Maryland, you lose. But Iowa should win both those games. That would be just the 20,000 foot view. There's not one of those for Wisconsin right now. I mean, Wisconsin looks like they could lose all 4. Maybe they win 1, maybe they win 3. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of even matchups for them the rest of the way. And so I think they're looking at this as a gettable game. But even then, I don't know that now that these teams are in this position, I don't know that they even need to look ahead. Looking at who you're facing, a rival, it's a bus trip.
Same record,
same spot. Coaches, of course, look at it because they recruit a lot of the same players.
Yeah, definitely.
And there's just so many small things. It's kind of like playing, and if you're in small town Iowa and it's Wilton versus Durant, or it's Highland versus Lone Tree. I don't know if they play each other or not, but
West Branch and Regina.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, that's Hatfields and McCoys there. Solon versus Mount Vernon. So it's just the essence of sports, the essence of football, and that's what I think is, what's really going to carry the day and the night. And hopefully the fans have gotten over their disappointment for both fan bases and just look at it for, you want to win the bowl.
I will say, Miss Wisconsin is not. We talked about the quarterback situation at Iowa. Wisconsin hasn't had much luck the last 2 years. They've tried to address that position through the portal, and they've just had injuries and ineffective play. Tyler Van Dyke, season engine. I read something yesterday that they're thinking he could come back later in the season. I read an article on that. It seems odd, but anyway, he ain't playing this week. It'll be Braden Locke, who was 22 of 42 for 217 yards and no touchdowns last week against Penn State. And the pick 6 in the first half was a kick in the stones. And if he does that stuff against Iowa, it's going to be a long night for the Badgers.
He played most of that game last year, at least almost all the second half against Iowa, because Tanner Mordecai got hurt. And I would say his effectiveness as a quarterback is comparable to what we saw from Spencer Petras at Iowa. And, about a 50% passer. Let's see what his number is. It's
that's right around
57% total, 7 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. I mean, it's modest. He's okay. He's got a good arm and just he's a guy. And I think Tyler Van Dyke was better. Clearly he was better, but he was working his way up too, because he had some disappointing times at Miami. And they've got a really good running back in Tawi Walker. He's got 10 touchdowns.
They hit the portal hard. I didn't realize it until I was looking at the roster previewing this game. They had a lot of portal additions this year.
Yeah, especially on defense.
Yep.
And from what I can tell here on some of their things, I mean, their defense is okay. It's it's not what we grew to expect at Wisconsin, though. It's not what it was 5, 6, 7 years ago, where it was just like, you better maximize every possession. If you get ball, you better score or you're in trouble. And that's not like that at all. I mean, back then they had their linebackers were otherworldly. I mean, they're all still in the NFL, from Andrew Van Ginkel to T.J. Watt.
Seems like every time I turn on an NFL game, there's a damn Wisconsin linebacker from that 3-4 linebacker setup that's playing and terrorizing people in the NFL.
And they're saying the same thing about Iowa tight end.
Yeah, exactly. And their linebackers have fallen off, and the Iowa tight end production has fallen off.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a shame too.
And I should mention, I saw, was it John Steppe from the Gazette? He may have tweeted it last night that Luke Lachey's banged up and questionable for this weekend. He's had I guess something happened in last week's game. I'm not sure. You have any more info on that?
He got hurt and he was out for like half the game, and then came in, or then it's kind of hit and miss. That's about all I know for this week. And so, whether or not he's fully, healthy, and that might've been during the Kirk Ferentz show that they kind of,
that was last, he said it last night during the show, and John was listening and tweeted out what Kirk had said.
Yeah. And that's kind of a shame, because I think Luke he obviously has next level talent. It just didn't this year, for whatever reason, hasn't connected quite right. But anyway, with Wisconsin's defense, they used to be so good with run fits. They were everywhere they needed to be. They were fast and physical, and TJ Watt.
Check this stat, Scott. They rank 67th nationally in rushing yards against. They give up 144 yards per game. You wouldn't have seen that with Jim Leonard as the defensive coordinator.
No, Dave Aranda when he was there, or they were.
So that sets up well for KJ.
Mm-hmm, it does,
and Sullivan.
And Sullivan.
The running game could be effective this week.
And Kamari Moulton possibly, So those are some of the things that are really kind of surprising, as we know. Iowa's total offense isn't real high at 102 nationally, but they're 17th in rushing, and that's what matters. And
you got to have something to hang your hat on, right? Yeah. What is Wisconsin hanging its hat on?
It's got a pretty good running back.
But he's not Jonathan Taylor or Braylon Allen.
No Melvin Gordon over there.
And their offensive line is not, it's just different. And that's what I was saying earlier. Fickle came in and changed everything. Was it for the better? We'll see. He's got to show that it is. Phil Longo's, again, quarterback issues, but, I think we all kind of raised an eyebrow when we heard air raid at Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, they're so wrapped up in that identity, Rob. I mean, that's, they were, O-line U, basically. They were big, 340-pound monsters. They're running power O, and then you see those guys coming at you, and you knew, oh boy, if you're a D lineman and they're pulling, you better stand your ground, and you're going to get rocked. And you just got to be there for it and embrace it. And then you'd have a Jonathan Taylor or Melvin Gordon, or take your pick out of all the other great running backs they've had. And they didn't do anything with Braylon Allen last year at all, and he's playing okay in the NFL. I mean, it's just this is the fear you could also have with Iowa in when they make a change eventually at coach in 10 years when Kirk retires, in 10 years,
Well, it would be a similar situation, right? If Kirk announces his retirement in December, they hire a new head coach, and he goes, "Hey, we're going run and shoot.
Yeah.
We're going four or five wideouts. We're just going to open this thing up." Everybody would be in shock.
Mm-hmm. And people be excited until they'd actually see what would happen with that.
That it didn't work when the wind is whipping at Kinnick in November.
The thing is, this is what people don't realize, that Iowa and Wisconsin did a really good job of recruiting to who they are, what they can be.
Identity.
Yes. I mean, Iowa, is it easier to go out and find a 4-star wide receiver who's going to be an NFL's first or second round draft pick, or, in small town Iowa, or all the way into the Chicagoland? Or is it easier to go and find 3 or 4 offensive linemen in small town Iowa, in metro sized Iowa, who you can build into becoming a pretty good offensive line? I mean, if you're Ohio State and Michigan and Notre Dame and you recruit nationally, that's one thing. But if you don't have that footprint, you've got to recruit to what works best for you. And in Wisconsin and Iowa and the upper Midwest, it's like, okay, we can find guys who fit a running, a run ground control type system, and it works. Purdue, Maxim,
tight ends,
yeah,
offensive linemen.
Exactly. And if you develop those players trust you and they'll come to you for that. And that's what ultimately happened all these years, for decades, that they go in the Chicagoland, both those schools, and would go in, and that's why they could beat an Ohio State and a Michigan and a Notre Dame for offensive linemen. Sometimes it's like, hey, we got an opportunity for playing time here, and we've got the track record to prove that we can get you to the next level. And it wasn't a problem. But now you're trying to run air raid. You've got the Ducks. You've got the Buckeyes. You've got teams that a Michigan that recruits nothing but 4 and 5 stars.
USC's offense.
Yes, and you're not in the West Division, so you've got to play everybody, not just a select group of teams that are built like you. So I didn't think it made a lot of sense. I think you lean into your identity and then find. All they needed all those years, Rob, to be a Big Ten champion was a quarterback. If they had a good quarterback, and we thought they had it with Graham Mertz,
yep,
and it turned out not to be the case. But if they would have had a Russell Wilson in 2016 or 17, yeah, they might have been in a playoff.
Looking at the numbers here, Wisconsin ranks 24th in scoring defense. They're giving up only 18.8 points per game. And that's one spot ahead of Iowa that's giving up 19 points a game. I got those numbers right, Scott?
Yeah.
So that's tight. And then I always look, I said this last week, I look at special teams. And we gave you guys notice that Weechin was close to breaking one. And sure enough, he broke one last week. Specialist-wise, Wisconsin is solid. They've got a good punter. They've got a good kicker who was a Groza semifinalist last year. They've got a dangerous kick returner in Vinny Anthony. They don't cover. What was it that I looked up? One of the coverage teams is not great. Kick returns.
Mm-hmm.
They are good. They're 17th. Punt returns, not so good. They give up 6 yards a punt return. Those things can be wonky because you just situational.
Yeah.
You give up a long one and stuff like that. But we know going into this game that both teams have punters that can flip the field and kickers that can make important kicks in a close game. This is a 3.5 point spread. It's good to look at those special teams because I think they'll be a factor on Saturday.
It always is. And one thing I would say about Iowa is be careful, because we've seen too many years in a row where they've had some sort of special teams debacle, which is really, really wild. Like you think about the game with, God bless Sean Meyer, but, bounces off his leg. And that was a real critical play in a really important game. And in
what year was that?
2018.
18, right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then in 2020, Charlie Jones fumbles a punt, and that's the only way Wisconsin scores a touchdown. And, they've had some issues just, now I don't know why. I mean, those were games that really mattered, but, I still think
teams are so, I would be, if I was a special teams coach, I know I wouldn't have any dark hair left. And, it's got to be hard for everybody because it's just there's so much going on in those plays. I'm talking about punt kick returns. Uh-huh. Just one breakdown, man. You just have one breakdown and it's to the house.
Look at Iowa versus Troy.
Yeah.
The punter punts the ball in the wrong direction.
Yep.
And, and Kirk called out the unit, which I expect him to, and not his freshman punter from Australia, but it was more the direction of the punt. And, you have a ultra fast guy on a really bad team that, he made
Right,
3
showing
points.
once again that there are good guys on bad teams.
Absolutely. And, you get somebody like that who's just not quite big, but man, he's got wheels, and things like that can happen. So ultimately, the one play can change. I mean, Caden Weegan, last week returns one for a touchdown. He had one called back because of penalties back against Illinois State. He's leading the country, I think, in combined punt and kickoff return yards. And if he would have had that one, he might be putting himself in All-American discussion, and maybe he still is, but he would have solidified himself. So I think that's, this is a game where you look at it and you figure it's going to be within the margins. It's going to be about field position, turnovers and penalties, of course, play into that too. But
both of these teams are two of the least penalized teams in the country.
Iowa won, and they're 6. So the other factor, and this one is really a predictor. It is the ultimate predictor of this series. Since Kirk Ferentz took over, Rob, only twice has the winning team had fewer rushing yards.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Once was in 2001 when Wisconsin had 1 more yard than Iowa. And once was in 2009 when Iowa went up there and won. But they were trailing for a while, and they kind of came back, and with Tony Moyaki making a great catch in the end zone and stuff. And so twice, and Kirk, out of, subtract the 2 years they didn't play, out of 24 times that they've played, or 23 times, that is the predictor. And so you look at that as a key indicator. If you remove the unknowns, which are injuries and penalties and turnovers, and Iowa's got the better running game. And the better running game usually wins this game. So that to me kind of spells it out in some ways.
Looking at my trusty weather app, Scott, for Saturday night. That's today. Let me find the day here. Let's go. Saturday, 60, high is 60.
Yeah.
And it's like the rain is coming in at midnight Friday night into Saturday, and then rain throughout the night, and then very windy.
Like last year,
yeah.
Or 2 years ago, or was it last year?
Was
it last year? Last year,
yeah. So again, we're talking about special teams but weather could also be a factor here. We talked about 2 quarterbacks that throwing the ball is not their strength, so to speak. So, does somebody make a mistake throwing the ball? It's Wisconsin, Iowa, expect the unexpected. There's usually some type of wonky, goofy shit that happens.
Look at it this way. What team is better just playing risk-averse football in bad weather elements right now? I mean, because of the coaching staff.
Yes.
That's Iowa. And last year they did it to perfection. They had 1 long run from LaShawn Williams, and their defense took over, and then Torrey Taylor averaged 50 yards a punt on 10 punts, and they were able to really slow down anything. I mean, I just would hear the groans at Camp Randall Stadium every time the ball would go to the 6-yard line. It's like, oh, because they knew they couldn't do anything then. And and if you're talking, the worst element for the passing game isn't rain, it isn't snow, it's wind.
Yeah.
And if you got it, unless you have a strong armed quarterback like Spencer was that way, but Nate Stanley was that way, but still, I remember when they had just horrific wins over at Purdue a couple of years ago. And
that was rough in that post game.
Yes. They finally changed it.
Did they?
Yes.
For the visitor. They change the locker room?
Yes. It's now they have like their own separate room and area.
Ah, okay. But is it still in that outpost?
No.
Oh, nice.
Yes, I know. I was like, what? What did you guys do?
Jim Harbaugh finally got his way.
Yeah, well, we finally got our way after that windstorm,
Yeah.
But I remember at that stage, Caleb had like a 75-yard touchdown run 2 years ago, and they're up 24-3, and Ferentz just went ultimate Ferentz ball,
which he should have.
Yes, and it's like, duh, and people were flipping out, as you might remember on Twitter, like, oh, we're not playing not to lose. No, you're playing to win because the wind is so bad here, And you've got that, you got to respect the other team. When you have Aiden O'Connell and Charlie Jones and Tyrone Tracy and some other players who are capable of beating you, the last thing you want to do is throw the ball into the wind, get it picked off and return for a touchdown. And all of a sudden they have a bunch of life in their home, and then they have that quick strike ability, and you're kind of playing it safe, and then you're screwed. And so that's why I look at this as, really Iowa. If it's windy, just play the game that you got. You've got the running back. Don't put your quarterback in a bad situation. Let them make a mistake, because they have made mistakes, and do your best to bottle up the run.
Yeah, and what I wrote, I think Wisconsin's approach will be, and Northwestern knew Brendan Sullivan obviously last week, but they weren't prepared for him to play as much as he did. They game planned for Cade McNamara. Sullivan would have, as we said earlier, would have come in anyway, and they would have adjusted to that. But Wisconsin's got a full week now, and I think Wisconsin will. I think if you're anybody, unless you're an idiot, you try to take Caleb away first. He's your number one. He's top of the scouting report. But I think after that, you take Sullivan away as well, take away his running ability and not let him get the edge, as Northwestern did time and time again last week. And then you see if Sullivan can beat you with the pass. Yeah. It's easier said than done, though, because Caleb Johnson, they've tried that before, and he still gets loose. But that's probably Wisconsin's approach. At least that would seem to me to be the smart approach.
Yeah, and you look at what Iowa is lost in the passing game, if you want to just look at it baseline, which is starting quarterback, starting split end, and Reese Vanderzee, and potential starting top two tight ends. And Addison Ostrenga and possibly Luke Lachey.
And Caleb Brown, who you thought would be one of the top receivers coming into the season. You haven't had him at all, but a passing game that's not very good as it is can't afford issues.
Right. And, you look at, Jacob Gill has been a nice find for them. And
it's funny that two of the impactful guys on offense are from Northwestern. Yeah, that tells you where Iowa offense was before the season.
Yeah, it was pretty brutal. And, and I think Seth Anderson has really, has been a nice lift to that offense. And
Cade had him in the corner of the end zone last week. That was the one where you're like, God, if he makes that throw on the first drive of the game.
Yep. There's been a lot.
And he overthrew him on the deep ball.
Yeah.
Anderson made a great catch, but he had his guy beat. If he throws that on the money, that's a touchdown.
Yeah, what a great diving catch.
Yeah, incredibly. Nice.
So,
catch.
They've got some pluses there. I just I don't know, Rob. I think Iowa is the better team. I think they've got better positional play, but I don't think this will be easy. I mean, they're both still, even though Wisconsin's not the Wisconsin that we knew seeing in our 40s, that they're still a pretty good team, and they're capable of beating Iowa if Iowa makes mistakes. But if it's mistake free, element free, or then I like Iowa to win this game. I think it's going to be close and hard fought and entertaining for those of us that like caveman football.
And oh, by the way, it's a night game at Kinnick.
Yeah.
Which we know the type of magic that happens in that place, and I assume people are going to be. We'll see how the weather is, but that is a sizable advantage for the Hawkeyes on Saturday night, having this game at Kinnick Stadium. And we'll pick this game in this next segment, where we go to pick the games, and I get them wrong.
No,
not
last week, man. You did a great job. You were 6-2. We only had one game where we were different, and this was my stupid Brian Ferentz called game of the year. The one where you just go, what are you doing? When I picked Rutgers at USC, and we both, I lost, you won, but the other ones that we lost were Ohio State. They're minus 25.5 and damn near lost.
Credit to Nebraska.
Yeah. And we both picked Wisconsin. We took 6.5 against Pennsylvania State, and didn't work out. When I
saw that pick six in the first half, I'm like, well, that one's a loss.
Yeah, exactly. So overall, I was 5-3. You were 6-2. So you won the week. You're at 46, 42 and 1, and I'm 56, 39 and 1 overall. So
Both over 500, both making you money, folks.
yeah, exactly. I should have been doing this all along. Well, let's see. We've got 8 games this week. So we'll start off with this is a sneaky good game. I'm excited to almost watch it. Minnesota -3 at Illinois.
Somebody brought this up on the mailbag and asked me if I was surprised that Minnesota was favored. And I said, yeah, I am. Not that I don't think it, but it's one of those lines that you're like, oh, give me Illinois.
Yeah.
They're at home. Why wouldn't I take them? Give me Minnesota. I'm throwing the points.
So you're taking the mighty
I'm
Gophers.
taking the Gophers, yep. I think the Gophers are a better team, but it's close. That line, I'm going with you're trying to get me to take Illinois, so I'm not. I'm going with that logic.
Here's the thing for me. Bielema has never lost to the Gophers. Not at Wisconsin. Not at
first
Illinois.
Time for everything.
And I'm going with you on this one. I think I'm taking the mighty Gophers at Champaign. I think, they had a big high 2 weeks ago against Michigan. They went out and found out where their place in the world was, whereas Minnesota's won 3 straight. They're churning their wins out. They played really well last week against Maryland.
Yep.
Now, Maryland is Maryland. We know that. Iowa will see them in a couple of weeks. But still, it's, they beat USC, they beat UCLA, they beat Maryland. They're 5-3. They're right on the cusp of being bowl eligible in a year where I know when I looked at that game when I was there for the North Carolina game, and then, of course, the Iowa game, that they lost both of them. And I'm going, yeah, I don't know if they're going to make it to a bowl. But now, they got a really good chance at it. And I think this is PJ would love to beat Bielema. Let's put it that way. Every year they've done this little thing, beating.
These are still important games too, Scott. The Wisconsin Iowas, the Minnesota Nebraska, where it's all in the same footprint and everybody recruits against each other. These are important games.
PJ likes to go to the suburbs. He's from there.
Yeah.
And so does Brett. Brett wants to go there. And this is the thing we know in covering recruiting and watching recruiting is one player can change games.
Yep.
But maybe that's Jamari Harris knocks away a ball on 3rd down and 5, and they force a punt, and then you win the game because of it. That, if he goes to Minnesota or Illinois, it's a 1-game thing. And then you're talking about the difference between 8 wins and 7 wins, higher bowl, an extension, or, it's just the narrowest of margins, sometimes
everybody's kind of packed in that middle right now behind the top 4.
Right. Marshall Yonda, by the way, will be the honorary captain this week. All right. This one is not as interesting. I don't think I'll pay attention other than the score. Northwestern -1 at Purdue.
Because they have to play it.
Yeah.
It's on the schedule. I'll go with Purdue. Just because they're home, and I don't have a feel for this one. Maybe Purdue has to win a game.
I'm torn because I don't know. I've seen both teams the last 2 weeks, and it's like I'm going to go with the better coach in this one. I'm going to go with David Braun. I'm going to take Northwestern, but I don't feel good about it. It's not one that I would take to the bank or the bookie. No, that's for sure.
Not at all.
Indiana -7.5 at Michigan State. And that hook the hook went up a little bit. And that's
I'm going to take Indiana here because I think it's the superior team, but this one would scare the hell out of me if it was real money.
Mm-hmm. Remember what we saw 2 weeks ago?
Yeah,
in East Lansing.
That's in my head.
When you have Nick Marsh and Aiden Childs, those are elite talents. So,
is Indiana is it Rourke? Is he still out?
No, he's supposed to play.
Okay, I feel better about the pick then.
Give me the points. I think Indiana finally gets in a close game. They've won every quarter this year. They've never trailed. And I'm not saying that they're going to trail. I would pick them to win outright. But I think Michigan State might put it.
Points.
Yeah, might make it like 31-24, and I'll be going, ha ha ha.
Yeah.
UCLA. Well, no, we'll call them UCLA. They've won a game in the Big Ten at Nebraska. 6.5 minus for Nebraska. I'm going to go with Nebraska to cover and get to bowl eligibility for the first time since 2016 when my mighty Cubs won the World Series.
Yeah, it's a long time ago.
I know, it's ancient history.
Yeah, give me the Huskers here. I think it's probably a touchdown-ish game, and since the number's under 7, I will take the home team.
Okay. The game of the week nationally, The Ohio State University -3 at Pennsylvania State University. I'm going with Buckeyes.
I will take Penn State.
Ooh. So this is that one of those weeks where everybody's kind of where we're expecting some rolling like bowling pins, knocking over all these things from the past with Minnesota and Fleck and 7-year itch for.
Trust me, I don't want Penn State to win.
Wow, that would be quite. You can imagine being Ohio State at this point on Sunday morning after losing your second game in the Big Ten. That would be Ryan Day.
Yeah,
might want to get some ice for that chair. All right, Oregon Ducks at Michigan. Oregon -15. I'm going to take the points.
I will too. That's a lot of points. I'm not giving that many points in the big house. I don't care what the situation is.
Yeah, that's a lot of points.
Yeah,
I think
Oregon is the best. I think Oregon wins.
Yeah,
I just maybe it's 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, right. That's a lot. That's a lot of points.
Yeah. I wonder when the last time Michigan's been that big. It's probably against maybe Ohio State. Probably. Before Harbaugh or something like that.
Yeah, it could. Yeah, it probably would have to be that, or it would have been in 20.
Yeah,
that would have been -29 going into that game, and then they would have covered that by middle of second quarter.
Yeah.
The 2 interesting games. One we're covering, of course, but the other one is USC -2.5 at Washington, and I think this is a coin flip game that makes me kind of go, I don't know which way it's going to go. I'm going to go with the Trojans, but I'm struggling with this one.
I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to go with Washington. USC is, I can't figure USC out. They're kind of like a better version of Maryland, and it's just week to week. You just don't know what you're going to get.
Yeah, man. Oh, well, yeah, it's weird when you think about it, because I always called UCLA the Maryland of the West Coast. Now it's USC.
Yeah.
But what USC is kind of what Nebraska was, whatever
yeah.
It is, that they've struggled coming into this league. They're built for a different style, and they've got to adjust, and they've adjusted a little bit defensively. They had a nice win against Wisconsin and certainly against LSU, but they've looked really ordinary, losing to Minnesota and losing at Maryland. And, so LSU is probably going, what are you guys doing? You're killing our playoff spot, So finally, the one we're covering, Rob, I'm excited about it. Wisconsin and Iowa. I always am, because I love this series. -3 for the Hawkeyes. I don't know what the over-under is. I didn't check, but I'm going to go with Iowa. I think it could be in that 3-point range, and maybe it ends up as a push, but I'm going to go Hawkeyes.
I'm going Hawkeyes as well here. I think I've got 27-17, something like that in that range. I think Iowa wins by 7 to 10 points in this game. It's, as I said, night game in Kinnick. I think Wisconsin's still trying to figure out how they're year 2, halfway through year 2, more than halfway through year 2. They just seem like they're still trying to find their way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a good position to be in when you're coming into a night game at Kinnick Stadium.
No, it isn't. And Iowa is motivated. That's always what you got to worry about with the team in Iowa's position, is like, are they going to just kind of fade? We've seen it a couple of times here, but not very many. I think 2010 qualifies, but then you look at the games themselves and the teams that they played. Yeah. There was one that they punted on, but they played some good teams and lost some good games. And maybe '06 is probably the fairest. But we're talking almost 20 years ago now, so they've hung in there.
What's
And
the record in November recently? I know you have that.
yeah, since losing to Wisconsin in 2019, Iowa is 18-1 in November. The only loss was Nebraska 2 years ago when Spencer got hurt.
And Saturday is November.
Against a rival. They've beaten 3 out of the last 4 years, and after, kind of enduring a bad stretch for a while, now they're kind of taking command. And if there's one more thing about this series that, Iowa can continue to lean into, is that with Wisconsin trying to figure out its identity, Iowa knows what its identity is.
Without question.
And when you vacate something like that, it's hard to reclaim it. And if you're talking about going in the Chicagoland, Iowa has leaned hard there. And in talking to those coaches in the spring for our Chicagoland Confidential, they were not sold on Wisconsin anymore, and that pipeline is big. And as we've talked about with my Jamari Harris example, he's a Chicagolander, that Chicagoan, I should say, but, is just that those players make plays in big games and against rivals.
Sebastian Castro.
Yeah, exactly.
Also from Chicago.
Yep. Last year he could have had a second pick 6.
Yep.
Should have just taken it back anyway. Said, hey, I remember Jack Campbell did it, so why can't I do?
Saturday night, folks, 6:30 or 6:38 kickoff or something like that. It's an NBC game, so there'll be NBC people annoying me all over the sidelines in this game, getting in my way. And I've become much more relaxed with it this year. I just moved to another location, and it's going to work out, and I'll get my photos, and I do. So I don't stress or fret over these things and get annoyed as much as I used to. I kind of chuckle to myself next time because you'll be sitting there and you'll just be like right on like the play. Mm-hmm. And then guy from Fox or NBC goes like this.
Yeah.
And you're like, I got no angle. It's one thing if it's the yard markers, the guys, the chain gang, but when it's the TV people, I feel like I still haven't gotten completely over when they sign the new TV contracts with these new networks, now they're invested and they send armies to these games on the sidelines. People they have like 2 people making sure that the cord doesn't get tangled up.
Right.
And they're in the way too. So, all right, that's my little rant on TV on sidelines as a photographer. 6:30 Saturday night, NBC. Battle for the Heartland Trophy, 72-pound ball, Kinnick Stadium, night game. Enjoy it. Please behave yourselves. I'll probably see some fun costumes for Halloween at Kinnick Stadium Saturday. So have fun. Enjoy your time with friends and family. And Scott and I will be back to talk to you next week. We may have to figure things out because if you didn't know, this is a short week. Iowa plays Friday next week. So it's a short week. So we may have to adjust the podcast. We'll talk about it, get back to you. Check my Twitter feed. We'll let you know. Okay. Have a good rest of your week, folks. We'll talk to you soon.